Welcome everyone to Josh on Wildfire, and I want to thank you first for being here. This is a really important topic, and I'm glad to see the turnout that we have. And we have a great resource here with Mike, who's going to be presenting in a minute. I'm your fire chief, Matt Vinci. With me in the room is our division chief for training, Ben Davidson, and one of our firefighters, Jim Westcott, and the rest of our team across the street on duty. This is an important topic. You're going to learn about how to keep your family safe, your home safe, mitigate incidents, hopefully at a smaller level, so that we don't have an escalated incident on the island. Remove fuel from your home. Have a plan, because wildfire is not upon us; it's actually here. Just look to the north of us. I was just talking to Mike a little bit about the fires in Canada that have already started. A lot of fuel, they're raging. The firefighters up there are out-resourced, and the fire is just, those fires have just taken control. What we want to do here is educate the public, educate the homeowner on what you can do, because what you do makes a difference. It's going to make a difference in your home, it's going to make a difference for your neighbors, and also for Gosh on Wildfire. So this is really important stuff. Wildfires can move very, very quickly, and they're destructive, and they're deadly, and we need to take them seriously. King County chiefs have been discussing in the last 24 to 48 hours that we're going to institute a burn ban earlier this year than we have in the last several years, I should say. Not ever, but in the last several years. Because it's dry, and it's getting drier, and we need to get ahead of it. We need to get ahead of it for the season that is upon us, and make sure that we educate the public early on and put those alerts out that we're going to reduce the risk on the island. It's about resources for us. So if it does come to a situation where we're dispatched, we need to have the right resources to get there as quickly as we can so we can mitigate the incident. And we're on it, as everyone knows, and I know very well here, even my first 10 months as your fire chief, resources are very thin. And for them to get to the island, for us to have additional resources, when I say fire and EMS resources, additional firefighters, welcome, additional firefighters, additional fire apparatus, water. It takes a long time to get them to the island. Well over an hour for us to get mutual aid from the mainland to the island. So we need a plan. You need a plan at the household level. We need a plan, which we have a plan here with the IFR, and we can get resources there rapidly, and we can get the fire mitigated at a very small level. Again, back to resources. I'll touch upon it briefly. We have a great career and volunteer staff here. Wonderful staff. It's what attracted me to want to be a part of the leadership team here, was the people that put the uniform on, that respond from home, that protect the island. They're wonderful. We need more of them. I've said that multiple times. We need to have the right amount of human resources to put the fire out, to respond to the apparatus. These wildfires are resource dependent, very intensive when it comes to the number of staff that we need to be able to respond to the apparatus, have the right amount of water there, deploy the hose lines. It takes a lot of people to be able to do that. So we're going to be asking the community to consider supporting additional resources here in August with a levy, and that will give us another station staff. It will give us newer, modern equipment. We have the oldest fleet in King County at 19 and a half years old with our apparatus fleet. So they are aged. They are, there's multiple issues when you have fire apparatus that's aged that we're working to address, but we do need to replace some apparatus. And we need to add some additional staff, and we need to increase our facilities. If we deploy out of the right locations with the right amount of people, with modern fire equipment, we are going to have a better outcome, and that's what we want. When we go out with a basic life support ambulance to a medical call, we want the best outcome for the citizens that we serve. We want the best outcome for advanced life support incidents and fire incidents, of course. We want to remove the possibility of property loss and loss of life. So the quicker we get there with the right amount of people, with the right amount of resources, we can make a difference and have the best outcomes. It goes right back to what we're going to learn today. Right amount of resources, the quicker we can respond to the incident, you can respond to the incident, you can call 911, you can remove that fuel, you can have a plan to get out of your house, the best outcome you're going to have. So I want to wrap it up there and turn it over to Mike.
How many firefighters do you have on duty at any given time?
So currently, right now, we have, is it 4 on duty? I didn't check this board yet because I just got back from a class.
Tonight, just 3.
We have 3. So we have 3 firefighter EMTs on board and on duty for a 24-hour shift. And we have 2 King County paramedics. They're not firefighters. They're advanced life support paramedics. But right now, if we go out on a medical call, they'll have 2 that will respond to that medical call, transport off island. The average time for turnaround time is 3 hours and 20 minutes by the time they get back on the island. You all know that better than I. You've been working on those, riding those ferries longer than I have, but it takes a long time for us to go to Seattle and Tacoma and come back. That leaves 1 firefighter, 1 career firefighter here. We have volunteers that are on duty, on call, if they're here on island. So a lot of our volunteers work off island, so they're not here on island. And they do augment our career staff. But what we need to deploy out within a defined time is a minimum, a bare minimum of 6 is where our goal is. So take the 3 today, and eventually our goal is to get to 6.
Instead of 1 coming to my house when it's on fire.
That's correct. That's correct.
Makes sense.
It does. It does. And it's about outcomes, property, protecting property, protecting life. Thank you for listening. More than ever, thank you more than anything. Thank you for being here to listen to Mike and our staff and our great volunteers that support our agency. Look forward to learning more tonight with Mike and getting to know each and every one of you. If you have any questions, I'm going to be around for the entire program. Welcome.
All right, thank you, Chief.
Mike.
All right, so just want to introduce myself quickly for those of you who don't know me. My name is Mike Lasecki, and as you may have seen on the registration for this event, I work for King Conservation District. I'm a forester there. I've been with the district for about 8 years, and I took over running our wildfire preparedness program last April after my colleague Matt Axe went and took a job with DNR. And so prior to coming to the district, I actually worked as a wildland firefighter. I did a season with Washington DNR in eastern Washington. I fought fire in Arizona. I did some prescribed fire where I originally am from, Wisconsin. And then the last 2 years before I came to the district, I ran wildland firefighting crews in Kentucky, eastern Kentucky. So I got experience with the wildland fire suppression side. Since I came to the district, it's been more about working with private landowners, helping them understand their wildfire risk, helping them sort of do the things that they can do around their home to sort of mitigate the risk of wildfire. And that's sort of the whole mission of the Conservation District. We're independent from the county, so we're not the county, we're not the county, we're not the county. I say it 3 times at every presentation because it's okay if you get it confused, but we're independent. We're kind of like your local fire district where, we have a board of supervisors, probably like, your fire district's commissioners, and each and every one of you, if you're a property owner, if you look on your property taxes, there'll be a little line item that says conservation. That goes to my agency, and that's what funds me coming out and doing these presentations. All the other services I do, we've got a farm planning team, we do forest stewardship work, we help people who have streams on their property, and our whole mission is basically just to empower private landowners. Help them overcome the barriers that they face, whether it's I don't know what to do, I need someone to help educate me, or I want to do the thing you're recommending, but I don't have the resources to do it. Our whole mission is around providing the resources to those private landowners to help them take care of the natural resources on their property. My program that I run now, the Wildfire Preparedness Program, is really focused on basically helping make sure that the landowner can stay on their property so they're not driven off by wildfire. You know, you can't be on your property and stewarding, you know, the trees and the soil and the animals on your property. If your house burns down, you gotta leave. So that's sort of the main mission and goal of my program now, is to help you all do the things that you can to reduce the chance that something happens during a wildfire event that causes your home, your livelihood on the island to be destroyed and you have to leave. That's a bit about me, KCD, what I did before I came to the district. The other thing I like to do at the beginning of all these presentations, because you're going to hear me talk a lot, is actually I like to get to know my audience a little bit. And it's not like I'm going to interview each and every one of you, but I ask some questions and I'd love to see like a show of hands and sort of response to these questions. So I'm just curious, show of hands, like how many folks in the room have heard of the Conservation District before me tonight? Oh man, that is awesome. Anyone want to shout out like the particular thing that you know about the Conservation District? Like 1 or 2 words?
A
Anyone?
weird voting system.
Voting system, okay. Well, yeah. Any others?
Slope repair.
Slope repair? Yeah, marine shoreline? Right
Mud
on.
management.
Mud management?
Forest Steward District.
Right. Awesome. That's great, yeah.
And you're not with King County.
A plus, you nailed it. Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, that's fantastic to have a lot of people who have interacted with our agency in the room. Our topic tonight is wildfire, and I'm always curious too, before I start these, anyone in the room has had like a personal experience with wildfire? Yeah, you mind sharing a bit?
In 1980, I was living in the mountains above San Bernardino, California.
Okay.
When the winds were blowing about 40 to 60 miles an hour, and a fire started, and I was living on top of the mountain, and it burned for 6 days. We could go out to the rim and look down at the fire, and we could see pine trees exploding, and it was about a 60-mile long fire line, and it burned 300 homes.
Wow.
And out of the 5 roads going up to the mountain, there was one dirt road that was open off the backside to get out. And when the fire finally got sustained, after the winds died down, about 1.5 miles from my house on the highway going down the mountain was completely red with phosphate.
Yeah. Your house survived though.
Yeah.
That's great.
Had everything packed in the truck ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else, personal experiences with wildfire they'd like to share?
Yeah, also in California, up in the mountain, and we were evacuated.
Yeah.
The fire wasn't close to us, but we,
You got the order.
yeah,
Yeah.
and we had to evacuate.
Yeah.
What surprised me was that there was a lot of ashes in the air, which I had not thought about. I thought if you know, you're either in the fire or you're not,
Yeah.
but it was actually snowing ashes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's eerie.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any personal experiences they want to share? Yes, you, sir.
This isn't as dramatic, but we were at a 4th of July party on Kingsbury, and somebody had a mega bomber and the hill slope caught. And what was impressive about it was the speed at which it traveled, and the fact that they were unable to put it out with hoses. Like they needed the minimum 2-inch hose to get it out. I mean, they needed backup, but people were slow to respond to the reality of what was happening in that moment.
Yeah.
But it went pretty fast and was, traveling just along maybe 40 feet of slope really quick.
Mm. Yeah.
It was maybe a half-hour event, 45-minute event, start to finish. But I was impressed that the hoses, 5-10 hoses, couldn't really impact it whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. Gentleman in the back.
Just managing a slash fire in Sierra Nevada growing up as a kid.
Yeah.
We lit a fire in February when there was snow on the ground, and we were still managing it, fighting it. It was ashes, but in July, we're still managing it.
yeah.
And it's just, even if you think they're contained, they're still.
Yeah, we're really gonna make sure they're out. That's great. Well, thank you everyone for, for those of you who've had experiences and sharing them. For me, it's always useful to kind of know where people are coming from, number of California fires, which is pretty typical, honestly, for like when I give these presentations. Yeah, and I was wondering also if there's anyone in the room that's maybe heard of or been part of a Firewise community. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Yeah, you.
We're not.
Why not?
I'm part of Vashon Be Prepared, and
Yeah.
I've urged
About the
that
program.
we join, we have ham radio, we have
Yeah.
CERT, we have other groups.
Yeah.
We don't have Firewise.
Yeah,
And one of our leaders is like, oh, the marine air is so moist, we'll never have a wildfire. But historically, we've had a few doozies. Yeah.
it can happen. I'll be talking about that. Yeah, that's great. That's good to know. I was just going to mention, before we go any further, I brought like a number of handouts. I set them over there on the side table, so like end of the evening, or honestly if you need to get up and stretch your legs, you want to go for a little walk. One particular one is dedicated, talks about the Firewise program, how people can organize and join it. The red, sort of smaller one, this is kind of all about what you should do around your home, best practices. And then if you're like really into it, you can get this like giant poster that like talks about everything, and you can really impress your friends and family. Was there a question up front?
No, we don't have the Firewise specifically, but on Maury, we actually have a 4th of July fire watch, a combination of Friends of Maury Parks and Gold Beach
Yeah.
Heroes, and we actually have people roaming around looking to make sure there's not a fire.
Yeah. 4th of July. What a day to light off fireworks.
Fireworks are banned.
Yes, they are, and that helps. But
It actually happens.
Yeah.
Real
Yeah.
drop.
yeah, that's great. Okay. And then like my last question before I actually get started with my presentation. Has anyone heard about Washington DNR's Wildfire Ready Neighbors program? Has that come across anyone's radar? Okay, just asking. That's a program that the DNR has been like running for the last couple of years, primarily in Eastern Washington, and it's really all about like supporting individuals, private landowners, but also like fire departments and stuff. They just launched this year on the west side, and it's in like, I think, Pierce County, Thurston County, Mason. They got additional funding just this month from the legislator, and they're talking about possibly expanding to additional counties. So I was just curious if anyone had heard about it yet. You may, in the coming years, hear more about it if they end up bringing it to King County. But it's another really great program. It's kind of like my program, but with a lot more like state funding and honestly a lot more staff. So I imagine if it would come to King County, they would be looking very closely at Vashon, because you guys have some particularly challenging situations.
What was that program?
Wildfire Ready Neighbors program. If you go to the DNR's website, you can definitely find info about it. Don't try to request like a visit, because they'll just be like, no, you're not in one of the counties, but you can try if you wanted. But yeah, great. Well, thank you everyone for sort of humoring me with answering my questions. Getting into the presentation tonight, so my goal, purpose is really, I want to inform and share with all of you sort of what I think is kind of the most important information to know about wildfire in Western Washington, because it's different than Eastern Washington, it's different from California in most cases. How to think about and understand wildfire risk in Western Washington and on Vashon Island in particular, and then also, how to mitigate wildfire risk in Western Washington and on Vashon Island in particular. So that's going to kind of be the first part of my presentation. What we'll actually do is I'm going to play segments of a really great documentary that came out recently, all about sort of wildfire in Washington, and the whole documentary itself is 45 minutes long. What the segments I play is only like 15. That's because I cut out all the Eastern Washington stuff. We're just going to be watching things that apply to Western Washington. I'm going to play segments and talk about segments as we kind of watch that together. after that, that will really hopefully kind of, you're going to be hearing from like our in-state experts on wildfire. Once we kind of go through that, then I'll transition to talking about sort of my program in particular, the services it provides, how they can help you sort of prepare and mitigate wildfire risk. I'll also talk about our cost share program, which is sort of part of my overall program. We'll look at some examples of cost share projects I've done around wildfire mitigation, and then we'll kind of end with, I'll talk briefly about DNR's services and support that they have available also to landowners. And then we should have some time at the end, question and answer, if you guys want to dive into any topics in more depth. But yeah, the name of the film is Living with Wildfire, and like I said, it is a locally produced film, so it's all about wildfire in Western Washington. What's also really great is it's actually produced by like a local production company called, I think it's North 40. They're based out of Wenatchee. They've produced a number of sort of environmental films. But this one in particular, I feel is great because rather than me having to expend a lot of energy trying to explain wildfire things to you guys, you get to hear from like literally like the research scientists, the experts that like I'm reading their research papers to sort of do my job. And honestly, they're just going to present it in a better way, hopefully, that you guys can sort of hear and understand, you know, what's important to understand about wildfire in Western Washington. But there's no other immediate pressing questions. We'll start the film, and like I said, I'll pause at certain moments, and we'll kind of talk about how does this apply to Vashon Island and yourselves.
Hi, I'm Dr. Paul Hesford, and I've been studying wildfires and their impact on western landscapes for the last 40 years. The goal of this film is to help us all discover the things we can do to change how dangerous and destructive wildfires have become in our state. The good news, in Washington state, there are many experts, organizations, and agencies working on this issue. One agency leading the charge is the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. The DNR oversees 5.6 million acres of public and private lands, but lately wildfire has occupied most of their attention.
We've seen year after year horrific fires, not just in eastern Washington, but also in western Washington.
Very surreal. I mean, this is Western Washington. We're not used to this sort of fire situation.
The last 3 years, 40% of the fires have been west of the Cascades. So we are seeing that a majority of our time now is being spent just getting on top of fires and putting them out and fighting them. We could continue to just react, or we could actually start to be proactive and invest our time and resources in changing the trajectory of our forests, changing the trajectory of our communities, and reduce these catastrophic fires and not make them our new normal. We need to be making sure that people know the risk to their home, the risk to their neighborhood, the risk to their community, so they can actually respond to it.
How at risk are we? The DNR is working hard to help us find out.
There's a lot of different factors that go into risk that we need to consider and think about. The physical aspects of the place, weather, temperature, how dry is it, the types of vegetation, how likely are they to burn, what is the fire history, how often did we used to see fire in the past, how long has it been since we've seen fire. We also think about some of the social dynamics, how many people are in that space. The communities at risk for wildfire exposure study found that Leavenworth, Washington was the highest in the Pacific Northwest. But it's everywhere in the state that has fire risk, basically. So our task was to create the state's first statewide wildland and urban interface map. The WUI, or the Wildland and Urban Interface, is the areas where wildlands are meeting or intermingling with spaces where human structures are present. What we really had to do was designate every part of the state as either being urban, that really dense development, interface, those areas that are going into more of the less developed areas intermix, where those houses are really interspersed within the wildlands, as well as wildlands themselves. It's one component of wildfire risk, it's not the entire tamale, but it is a key component. We have to think beyond just those houses that are bordering or intermingling with the woods. Houses that are deep into the subdivision are still going to be considered part of that WUI. Most of the folks that were surprised about WUI were from Western Washington, just how much of Western Washington is really considered WUI. We found there's pockets even in Seattle of the wildland-urban interface.
Does living in the WUI on the west side of the state mean that you are also at risk for wildfire?
What do you guys think? Yeah. And what do you think about Vashon Island? Do you guys think, based on what you just heard about that wildland-urban interface, does that sort of apply to Vashon? Yeah. You guys are pretty forested. There's a lot of native forest vegetation around. Lots of small properties have, they got their little chunk of forest. You guys have big, nice natural area parks. But what you might, maybe, and what Ashley was talking about, they talked a lot about the wildland-urban interface, but if you caught, she said that's not the main, that's one aspect. So did you guys, anyone catch some of those other factors that go into determining your risk? Anyone here recall what she said?
I didn't see from the movie, but humidity.
Yeah. Weather, temperature,
The type of vegetation.
the type of vegetation. Yeah. Yeah, and that's really important to understand that wildland-urban interface, they have their map. I use it in my job to sort of identify, okay, these are high priority areas. Vashon is a high priority area because we know basically everyone who lives on the island is in the wildland-urban interface, but if it's December and it's pouring rain out and it's cold and chilly, are you worried about a wildfire in the wildland-urban interface on Vashon Island? No. Weather is a huge factor. And then another factor that's really important, I think, they mentioned that there's even WUI in Seattle. I'm not doing wildfire risk assessments in Seattle. I'm not really investing any of my time in Seattle. They have wildland-urban interface, and sure, maybe they experience the same temperatures and sort of weather conditions that you guys do. But what else is different about if we compared Seattle to Vashon? Resources, exactly. And that's a huge factor when it comes to wildfire on the west side, is that, if something starts in Seattle or really any of those mainland sort of developed areas, there's going to be a lot of resources available. Hillary mentioned in her little snippet that she said, there was, 2/3 of all the fire incidents over the last 2 years was in Western Washington. That's pretty surprising, right? You don't hear about that on the news, and the reason is because all the resources that are available on the west side are quickly putting them out. They're not growing really big. And this is another reason why, for me, Vashon is a high priority area. I want to be working on the island because compared to the mainland, compared to King County, the areas around those developed cities, you guys are resource poor. You don't have multiple fire districts that can readily respond. You've got Vashon Fire and Rescue. DNR, if they got to come to the island, it's going to take time for them to get resources here. So again, that goes into the risk factor. That's why I'm wanting to invest my time and do work on Vashon, is because you guys, you're all wildland-urban interface. If you experience hot, dry weather, that increases your risk. And then if something does start, you have limited resources. So it's going to be more of a challenge to catch it early and put it out. So yeah, just things to keep in mind. All right, we'll keep watching.
We visited with Dr. Dan Donato, a Westside fire ecologist with the DNR, to find out more.
Western Washington is the wet side of the state, and the common perception is that wildfire is mostly an eastern Washington issue. But what we know from the evidence is that fire is very much a Western Washington issue. It just behaves very
When conditions are right, fires can get huge here.
it's a three-part recipe for Western Washington wildfires. You gotta have an ignition source, of course. It's usually an exceptionally dry summer, and then you get that dry east wind event. When that east wind event starts pushing those fires, it's a big monster of a fire, which is actually what happened in 2020.
Right now, Governor Inslee is visiting the Bonnie Lake Sammamish area where 4 more Pierce County homes were destroyed by historic wildfires.
These forests have burned in huge patches like this and regenerated, and all the forests that we know on the landscape today all originated in fire. There was the 1902 Yakult burn in southwest Washington. Various estimates of that range from 250,000 to 1 million acres. That was driven by an east wind event. 80 or 90% of it happened in like a single 24-hour period. And a lot of that burn footprint would have been high severity or just completely stand replacing. Kills all the trees over a large area. There's also a second flavor of what we call a moderate condition fire on the west side, where we might have that dry period in the summer and an ignition source, but not the east wind event.
When you look at some of the data, some of the areas in Western Washington have fires every 15 years.
We've seen some of those in the last few years. The North Peak fire near Mount Rainier, the Eagle Creek fire in the Columbia Gorge. And what we saw there was a smaller fire that burned with a more mixed severity profile instead of being mostly stand replacing. I would argue that we're perhaps not prepared for either type of west side fire. A lot of us like to live in the forest, and then there's just communities that have sprouted up in places where fire could happen. We're kind of loading the dice. The stage is set for a pretty big, high severity, high impact fire.
Just real briefly, you know, again, like Dan was saying, and he's one of the researchers that like, I constantly read his research papers because they're great. West side, like wildfires is like, they happen. It is a normal part of our ecosystem. Like, and you know, did anyone catch sort of like, you know, those 3 key like sort of weather conditions that are like really high risk we gotta watch out for?
Wind, yeah.
Winds. A particular wind phenomena, yeah, an east wind event. Yeah, and that, if that aligns with like that really hot, dry summer, you know, and I'm thinking like, you know, August into like September, still no rains have come, and then we get a east wind event. And the third thing is like the ignition source, and that's where it's like, you know, that's almost like more common on the west side because of, yeah, there's just more people on the west side, more people out doing things, you know, in the woods or even in their backyard that has the potential to start a fire. So those are 3 really important things to just be aware of, you know. As Dan said, there's sort of these 2 flavors of wildfire. There's the moderate behavior where it's like you don't have that east wind event that is making the fire so large that it's basically uncontrolled and will just kind of burn over anything. And there's the moderate where it's just, yeah, very dry conditions, you have an ignition source, it is able to spread. They mentioned the video of like 2020 that happened, if you guys remember, that was like in the spring. This last fall, it happened again actually, and it wasn't a major east wind event, but I don't know if you guys remember like the Bolt Creek fire.
Very smoky.
Yeah, up near Skokomish. I think that got to about 14,000 acres over, you know, like a 48-hour period. And again, that was because it was like around Memorial Day, it was in September, even into October, it was dry, no rain, and you know, it had plenty of fuel to burn, and there was no way that they could contain it. Lot Katrine also, that was northeast of North Bend, and I think that got to about 5,000 acres. Luckily no homes destroyed, it was all kind of forested land, but when that happened, what was going through my mind was, those aren't isolated areas that were experiencing those conditions. Most of the county was experiencing those same dry conditions, that same east wind happening. It just came down to there wasn't an ignition, or if there was ignition, it got put out quickly. So, question in the back.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that the threat is sort of static, but what I've read is that in the last like 3 or 4 years, we've had a record number of wildfires on the west side, and it's not just a matter of us having resources, it's that there's a lot more threat.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Because even like in reading the research, I was like, oh man, these east wind event large west side fires are like pretty rare. I wonder if I'll ever get to experience one while I'm living and working here. And like, oh my gosh, like last fall, it happened. Wow, that was really surprising. Yeah, it's really funny. What I always tell people is the historic pattern on the west side, especially when you compare it to like eastern Washington or California, the fire regime, the fire return interval is much longer. So like, just, you know, like how many people here in the room can remember a large wildfire occurring on Vashon?
Ah.
I think it was 1930.
Yeah, like pretty long ago.
Yeah, a couple of them.
But the reality is, every summer there's an opportunity.
Sure.
Because all it needs is that alignment of those three factors. Hot, dry summer, so all the fuels are dried out, an ignition source, and enough wind to kind of get away from us.
This is
So,
going to be the warmest, driest spring I think that we've had.
yeah, which is why, like your chief was talking about, like being proactive, putting a burn ban in place earlier than they usually do. But yeah, the way I describe wildfire risk is it's dynamic. It's not static. There is a certain baseline, but you got to keep an eye on the weather. Question?
What's in Western Washington, the major ignition source?
People.
People.
Yep. Lightning is incredibly rare. Like I think Ashley, she'll come back and she'll mention, I think it's close to 90% in Western Washington. Across the entire state, I think it's around 70%, so they get a little more lightning ignitions on the east side. But yeah, it's us. So, yeah.
People as in cigarettes or fireworks or what?
Yeah, all of the above. You know, cigarettes. For me, when I was wildland firefighting, like the most common thing that started a wildfire was hot exhaust. Someone pulling off to the side of the road, or pulling off somewhere after they've been like out recreating, and that hot exhaust pipe touches grass, and it's off to the races. Yeah. So, but any of those activities.
There's a guy in San Diego County who got lost in the mountains and thought he'd start a fire so they'd find him.
Oh my God.
700 homes.
Yeah, oh my gosh. Yeah. So they're going to talk about sort of like that factor of human ignitions, and like that is definitely, it's an area where we have the power to make a difference. So I'll keep going.
In recent years, fire agencies throughout the U.S. have joined together to develop what's called the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. The strategy focuses on 4 action items. They are managing fuels in our landscapes, protecting homes, communities, and other things that we value, reducing human-caused ignitions, and effectively responding to wildfire. The first priority, managing fuels, is all about reducing the unnatural levels of fuels that have built up in our forests and wildlands so that wildfire will behave in a much more favorable way. We can actually change how wildfire comes to us.
The west side is a really different animal. These are some of the most productive forests on the planet. They're fuel rich, naturally, and they always have been. There are multiple types of fire on the west side. For the moderate condition events, we could apply a lot of what we know from the east side. Actually, with fire-wise principles, we could thin and reduce forest biomass around critical infrastructure and communities and homes, create fire breaks. Those do matter. It's just that we also have to recognize that there's that second flavor that is a force of nature that will probably overrun just about everything on the landscape. There's an ignition on the landscape and a wind event kicks up. You know, the west side has always got enough biomass to carry a fire under those conditions. Really, if you want to manage the risk, it's a matter of catching it while it's small before an east wind event kicks up and be ready to suppress them quickly. And so what we need to have is that disaster preparedness mindset of hardening our infrastructure to the extent we can and being prepared to have evacuation plans to get out of the way.
There's a couple things I wanted to highlight from that little section that Dan was talking about. At the beginning, Paul was saying like, oh, like, you know, we can modify fuels and stuff. That was sort of some of my editing was in play there because then it went straight to Dan. What Paul was really talking about is east side conditions. Like, yes, thinning and sort of like proactively managing sort of like the density of trees on the east side is a really important sort of practice that needs to be done to sort of get those forests on the east side back in healthy condition, more resilient to wildfire. Don't confuse that with like, that will also work on the west side. Like Dan was saying, there's always enough fuel. Like in our native forests, like you're never gonna thin your way out of sort of like preventing wildfire. It's a lost cause. Instead, what he's saying is like, you know, where you should focus is on the infrastructure. Because like doing some of the things that, you know, harden the home from being destroyed by wildfire, right? Those are our most important assets really. It's like the homes, the people in the homes, and thinking about evacuation routes if they need to be used. So like that's what my program's really built around, because that's the reality on the west side. I don't focus on sort of like, hey, we need to thin the forest that's, you know, honestly more than 30 feet from your home, because what I'm most concerned about is 30 feet away from your home and what's your driveway look like to get to the road. You know, for me that's the priority, just given the reality of west side wildfire. And another really important point that Dan mentioned too, you know, how do we fight those mega fires, you know, that if we have the east wind event, super dry, everything aligns. It's about catching them early and putting them out. And that's where it comes into play of like, well, what's the wildfire, what's the fire response resources that are available? I know like this past year, DNR was getting very proactive about staging crews just like ahead of time. Like there's no wildfires, but they know that the conditions are such, we should have our resources nearby in case something starts so we can quickly put it out. And local fire districts are a big part of that too. You know, they're the ones that are in the community, they're the ones that kind of know like where our activity's happening. So the more we have local fire district resources available, sort of active and available to respond, that's honestly probably our best defense to like those really big fires, because we just got to catch them early before they grow. So just wanted to highlight those few points.
The second priority of the cohesive strategy is to protect our homes, our communities, and high-value assets from wildfire. And as we've discovered throughout Washington State's WUI mapping and ongoing risk assessments, most of us live in places that are at risk of experiencing severe wildfires. So how do we protect our communities? First, we need to understand how wildfire will most likely threaten them. Let's say a wildfire is burning in a nearby forest or shrub steppe and is now racing towards your community. You might be thinking that as long as your house isn't on the edge of town, you don't have to worry much about it. But the reality is everyone who lives in this community is at risk, and here's why. First, it's not the wall of flames from the wildfire that's most likely to threaten your home. It's the millions of embers that are carried on the wind that are your main concern. High winds can actually drive these burning embers up to 5 miles ahead of the flames. They can then land on your roof, in your leaf-filled gutters, sucked into attic venting, or ignite hedges, wood piles, or outbuildings near your home. Secondly, there's a whole lot of fuel for fire in a house, and when houses do catch on fire, they can send flames up to 70 feet or more in the air, making even more embers that spread fire throughout the community. In densely built neighborhoods, fire can quickly spread from house to house or leapfrog to other neighborhoods. How do you go about suppressing this kind of fire? So even if your neighbors have done everything they can to prepare and protect their home, what you do or don't do around your home and property directly impacts them and the rest of your neighborhood. We're all in this together, and we're only as strong as our weakest link. The only way to prepare for wildfires is to work together as a community and get everyone's property ready to go long before the fire starts. And once we're ready, we've got to stay ready. How do we go about preparing our homes for the coming wildfires? Where do we start?
One of the most important steps a property owner can take is to request a site visit from a professional.
Each property is going to be different. Each property is going to have, different ignition vulnerabilities, different issues.
So Shirley, hi, I'm Jerry McAdams. I'm a wildfire mitigation specialist, and I'm here to do a home evaluation with you today.
On a site visit, we can look at the building construction and identify vulnerabilities from radiant heat, flame contact, embers, and we can also take a look at the landscaping.
They're far enough away from the house, I'm not worried about those, right? We talked to the homeowner about the good things that they're doing, but these are also some ignition vulnerabilities that I'm seeing, you know, things that you can do to make you and your family safer from the threat of wildfire. So you've got this area where the siding's coming loose and you see this gap underneath there. That's an area where you could potentially get embers.
We follow guidance from the Institute for Business and Home Safety, who have studied a concept called the home ignition zone.
You need to go out, look at the ignition vulnerabilities in each one of those zones. So surely this is an evergreen that I would encourage you to remove. There's fine dead fuel, right? And all that stuff is gonna burn if you have embers landing in that kind of material, right? So
You essentially want to keep 5 feet around the base of your home as non-combustible as possible. In that 5 to 30 feet zone, you want to space out your vegetation so that fire does not transmit from tree to tree or shrub to shrub.
this is a large evergreen with a lot of dead material inside it. If that does get burning, this shed right here, which is combustible material, right, it's made of wood, is gonna start to burn. And then if this shed burns, right, that, again, that heat transfer process, right, that darned heat transfer process, it's gonna burn your house, okay? So it's this shrub out there burning, gets a shed burning, and now the house is burning, right? That's what we wanna alleviate. It's just a sequence of events to bring that fire to the house. And so that house, you know, a half mile into the neighborhood, away from your open space, is just as at risk or more at risk, depending upon their ignition vulnerabilities, than that house that's on the fringe. If the homeowners are doing their part and the house is standalone, firefighting resources can focus on putting out the fire instead of doing structural protection, and they'll get the fire put out sooner. That does threaten less homes, less people.
So I wanted to mention, one of the handouts I came with is, it's from National Fire Protection Association. They're the ones that run the FireWise program, and it's how to prepare your home for wildfire, and there's a literal checklist of like those most important things that you can do around your home that like make a big difference, and they're all within that 0 to 5 foot area. And that sort of clip of, you know, the guy going around with the landowner, that's what I do a lot of time. That's how I spend a lot of my time, is doing site visits to people's homes, walking around, helping them identify, like, where's the vulnerabilities? Because what's the thing that's most likely to cause your home to be damaged or destroyed in a wildfire? Anyone?
Your neighbor.
Or your neighbor, or what's going to catch their house on fire?
Pine trees? I don't know.
Embers.
Embers.
Statistically, that is the most likely thing that's going to cause your house to be damaged or destroyed in a wildfire.
But
Yes.
you say, you know, protect the house from this 5 foot or 30 foot, but then you talk about the embers traveling up to 5 miles.
Yep.
So is it a futile attempt at doing anything, or?
No, because the reason that we're sort of focusing on that 5 foot, 30 foot, and the 5 foot, and actually what you didn't really emphasize, but I always do, is that 5 foot area, where I start with is always the home itself. What's the conditions on the roof? What's, you know, the gutter situation? You know, how can embers get inside your home or land on top of it somewhere and start a small fire, which turns into a big fire because it actually ignites the home itself. So if we do those things, especially in that 0 to 5 foot, who cares if embers are landing on it? If we've taken care of the 30 foot area, okay, embers land within that 30 foot area, it starts a little fire, but if you've taken care of 5 feet, even if that surface fire is spreading towards your home, it hits your 5 foot area, way less likely that it's going to cause the home itself to ignite. So it's sort of taking that perspective of like what's most important, the home. Then we start with the home and we work out. You know, if we don't do that, if you're focusing on that 30 to 100 foot, oh my God, my forest, I need to thin it, that's where it's like it's sort of futile. because the embers will just skip right over that, and if you've got pine needles in your gutters and, you know, all over your front porch that's made out of wood, then it doesn't matter. Then the embers are just gonna go right by all your fuels management work and catch your house on fire. Good question though. Any other questions before yeah?
So, there's like a 3-mile moat that we have heading west, does that protect us from most of what could be coming from Seattle?
Yes.
So if we have a wildfire, if we have one here, it'll start here?
Yeah, more than likely, yeah. I would say, yeah, probably, like, if the ignition source is gonna occur on the island. You know, possibly, you know, some fire, if it grew big enough, prevailing winds maybe, but it's a highly
It would be a
unlikely.
disaster in Seattle, if it's that big.
Ignition source is more than likely gonna be on the island to have, you know, a fire of some size. In the back?
Well, someone was planning on putting a new roof on their house. Do you have any suggestions, or are there any studies on recommendations?
Yeah, there's, for a lot of materials, like roofing materials, and even, you know, when you're like putting in a new roof, there's materials and there's like a roof assembly. If you're hiring someone to do it, if you're doing it yourself, there should be a fire class rating for those materials, or if it's like a roof assembly, multiple things kind of fitted together to actually, you know, complete the roof. Those will have fire rating classes. Class A is the best, and that's gonna be like a lot of metal roofs. Asphalt shingles oftentimes are rated Class A, and those are like the least flammable. You know, those are gonna give you great protection from embers, even if a little, you know, pile of pine needles starts burning. You know, they've been tested and shown that very non-flammable. Other questions? Yeah.
I presume you'll get to hazard mitigation specialist site visit?
Yeah, I will. That's coming up. All right, I'll play on.
The third priority of the cohesive strategy is to reduce human-caused fire starts.
A lot of our fires throughout the state are started by people. In Western Washington and Western Oregon, it's about 90%. If you take that across the whole state, it's a little bit more than 70%.
So there's just a lot more emissions on the landscape now than there were historically.
A lot of them are started by people doing things accidentally that they didn't realize are risk factors. They might be lighting off fireworks in the middle of July when it's the heart of fire season.
If we take steps, each and every one of us, to prevent the fires in the first place, that will reduce the number of fires that we're facing.
And the good news is that reducing these human-caused starts cost us nothing. It's a matter of checking the wildfire risk level before we engage in any activities that could spark a fire. Snuffing that cigarette butt out. Avoiding parking our cars and trucks in dry, tall grasses. Avoiding summer campfires and fireworks are things we can all do. The good news is we can change the way things are. These changes will require action on our part. Let's review the actions we've already discussed. Determine the wildfire risk to you, your property, and your neighborhood. We now know that every square inch of Washington state has a history with wildfire and smoke. The DNR is working on a risk assessment, and nearly everyone in the state has some level of risk to contend with. Remember what we learned about ember travel and house-to-house wildfire spread. Take some time to consider your own level of risk and do this each year. We learned that the majority of wildfires in Washington state are human-caused. Each of us must work to reduce these accidental fire starts. We know that reducing fuel is effective at changing wildfire behavior. Take a look around your home for fuels and other conditions that make it easy for fire to ignite your home. Remove those fuels. Don't know where to start? Is cost an issue? Call your local fire department for help. The state, counties, and NGOs are offering more and more programs to cost share and assist in fuels reduction. Remember, what you do or don't do around your home can significantly affect your neighbors and your neighborhood. For our forests and wildlands, as Commissioner France said, each of us needs to support increasing forest treatments at a greater pace and scale, including prescribed burning, mechanical thinning, and managed wildfire. A no smoke option is not on the table, but a less smoke option is. We can choose prescribed burning smoke over megafire smoke. We can choose to thin our forests and prepare our communities. We can reduce our risk of severe and destructive wildfire. Let's get this done.
Okay. And that's the name of the production company. Like I said, that was a very trimmed down version. The full documentary is 45 minutes. And that last bit where they're talking about like prescribed fire and you know, smoke and stuff, that really is part of their sort of east side focus. But I encourage you all, if you enjoyed these segments, you wanted to have a clearer picture of the entire state and wildfire and sort of issues in eastern Washington, it's a great documentary, and it's available for free. You just go to the North 40, I think, production website. They have it available for free to download. That's how I was able to get it and sort of use it for my presentation. That was it for the documentary. I was going to transition now, sort of talking about my wildfire preparedness program, the services we provide to landowners and communities. But before I do that, any, I guess, final questions related to the film? Yeah.
Living with wildfire, I was in a community in Oakland and talked to some residents after a wildland fire. Burned 800 homes, I think.
Yeah, the Oakland fires.
And people were sitting in their home having dinner when they said, "Do you smell smoke?" They walked outside their house, 3 houses down, the homes were totally engulfed.
Yeah.
All they could do is get in their car and go. So that's something that's been discussed on Vashon, is that if a wildland fire does break out, are there ways that the community can be alerted through text or something like that, that they know that a wildfire is coming?
Yeah, it's a good question. Is there a response in the back?
Yeah, King County has an alert system, and so you're encouraged to sign up for King County alerts. And then also Voice of Vashon has a very proactive emergency alert email system that will email at least activity. So those are the two really proactive alerting systems that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and oftentimes when there's a wildfire situation where it looks like evacuations could be a potential necessity, the local emergency management and sheriff's department are like, from what I've seen, my experience has been their evacuation sort of like plans get activated. And like, I know that happened with like the Bolt Creek fire, where they basically designate a certain distance from the fire. This is, you need to leave. This is, you need to monitor. This is, you know, get ready, because there's the potential that, you know, if things don't go well, you're going to be asked to evacuate. Yeah, it's always that Oakland situation, though, I imagine, like, probably caught everyone off guard.
Yeah.
Probably a heavily, you know, pretty dense neighborhood.
Big wind event.
Yep, yep. So there's always that challenge of, you know, we can plan and act, but sometimes Mother Nature can move just too fast. So, other questions or comments related to the film before I transition to talking about my program? Okay. So yeah, name of my program that I coordinate is the Wildfire Preparedness Program. And like I was sort of saying at the beginning, our whole purpose with this program is to support private landowners and communities that live in these wildland urban interface areas of King County. And the whole goal is we want to prevent destruction of homes and other residential structures. You know, all my services, sort of, you know, how the program's designed is to sort of prevent that from happening by supporting private landowners and their communities. What we don't do and what we're not designed to do is sort of like address, you know, sort of the public health issues of like smoke in the air or, you know, wildfire suppression, post-fire sort of like, you know, activities. Like, we don't do any of that. there's a lot of different public agencies that are involved with like sort of wildfire response, recovery, preparedness. We see our role, sort of the best role we can play, is like staying in our lane of like, we're gonna work with those private landowners that have property that they are in control of, and we're gonna support them in taking those voluntary actions that reduce their risk. So, what I have up there is basically, it's a screenshot of like our website. So if you go to like, search on the internet, King Conservation District, wildfire, you should land here. And on the webpage, it sort of talks about some of, what I think is really important information specific to King County to know. We often have blog posts that, feature certain topics related to wildfire preparedness. And then up in the corner there, a little green button, I think in a couple slides I'll highlight it. That is a way to sort of get in touch with me, ask for help, ask for our services. So the main services that we provide, or I provide because it's a one-person program, those risk assessments, like that you saw demonstrated in the video. That photo on the left is me. I'm out in the Falls City area, and I come out, I walk around the entire home with the landowner, and I'm just helping them understand, telling them what I see as vulnerabilities, and talking about what's the practices they could implement to sort of reduce those vulnerabilities to their home. I do a lot of these. This is a big part of sort of the services I provide. And like I said earlier, Vashon is one of my high priority areas. So, usually what I like to do, or I really hope to see, is like I get a bunch of requests from Vashon, and then I'll come out for an entire day. And all I'm doing is going to those neighborhoods, going to those individual properties, doing my risk assessments, talking to folks. Post-site visit like that you see on the left, I send a very detailed report that basically I literally take a bunch of pictures of things that I saw, and I take a marker on like my Microsoft Paint, and I am just circling like, remember this? We talked about this, and then I talk about here's the things you could do to address that issue. So every site visit gets a follow-up report. The middle picture, this was actually done back in 2018, but it's a service we still do. If you're part of a neighborhood or a community that wants to get organized, become a FireWise USA site, enroll in that program, I'll work with you to sort of do the steps to get to that point of enrolling in the program. And a big part of being able to apply and enroll in that program is you need to get a risk assessment for basically like your entire neighborhood. So if you live on a street and you're like talking to your neighbors and you're like, yeah, we all want to do something together, then rather than just do an individual home risk assessment, I'll walk an entire neighborhood and I'll document the conditions.
How are you defining it?
That's up to the community. Yeah, it comes down to, is it just your street? Is it, sort of everyone in this sort of like, defined area? I looked at the community to tell me what's the boundaries that you want me to look at, that you think you want to have the residents participating in. Good question. Yeah, and so big part is doing those community risk assessments, and then that's a photo of the community FireWise plan that got written. Basically, I'll work with the residents to put together a FireWise plan that sort of outlines the more community-wide strategies, activities that collectively people are going to take, not just on their property. And then that last photo on the right, that's basically a photo of an example of a cost share project that I did with a landowner. You can kind of see that's wood chip bark sort of on the left side of the picture that used to go all the way to the exterior wall of the home. We did a cost share project with that gentleman to basically take 2 feet directly adjacent to the home, get rid of the wood chips, replace it with hardscaping, that crushed stone that you see there. And that we were able to cost share with him on that. We cost shared 75% for the total cost of having that installed by a landscaper. And then the fourth sort of like main service that I provide is what you're experiencing tonight. I come out and I give these presentations about wildfire, about our services. And tonight it's it's open to anyone on Vashon. But I also do presentations that are specific to neighborhoods. So in a couple weeks I'm going out to a community near Carnation, and it's just their neighborhood. We're getting together at their neighbor's property, and I'm presenting to them probably play that video in the beginning, but then we're going to transition and I'm going to put up a map of their neighborhood and where I'm going to talk about, here's what I saw, here's the risk factors, here's what you guys could do individually, here's the things that you could do collectively to sort of reduce your risk. So that's another big part of what I do as part of my program services. All right, and then transition to talking about, oh yeah, this. That's the button. Request technical assistance, and that button that sort of requests, help from my program. That's multiple places on the web page. And so if you want a risk assessment, that's how you got to do it. You can call me. I love talking on the phone. You can email me. But honestly, what I'm going to do is direct you to that. Or even if you're talking to me on the phone, I'll be like, hang on, let me pull up the intake form, and I'm going to enter the answers for you. It's just because, like I said, I'm a one-person program. I serve basically the entire county, and so I just need some kind of automated system to keep track of all the requests I get. I'm pretty quick about getting out and helping folks. Like I said, I try to wait till I have a couple of people who are asking for help in a given area, so I can kind of use my field time wisely. But yes, request technical assistance button. That's how you'll reach me. Was there a question?
I was just wondering how booked out you are.
Yeah, good question. So right now, I think I have around 10 requests, and generally it takes me about 2 weeks from when I get a request to when I contact someone about scheduling. So, but like I said, if I get a whole bunch of Vashon, I'll be like, great, I'm setting aside a day for Vashon, and I'll reach out to folks. So, and I guess I'll mention too is the risk assessments of individual homes. I like to do them with the landowners there because we walk around and we talk about things. I get to learn about what you are concerned about, what you're willing to do. But it's also a service I can do independent because I always send that follow-up report. So, if you're out of town or something and you're like, no, I really do want that risk assessment, I can go out with your permission, document everything, and send you the follow-up report. I just like to do it with the landowner there. All right, I was going to transition to talking about the cost share program because this is something that I'm really focused on. My agency has a lot of money to invest in sort of these wildfire mitigation practices, and so I'm really prioritizing trying to do more cost share projects, helping people implement those best practices around their home. And again, the purpose of the mitigation, the cost share, is just like the overall program. We're trying to prevent homes from being destroyed. And so the things that we cost share on are going to be based on what's in your risk assessment report. It's based on what are we seeing, what's the biggest vulnerability to your home, and those are the projects that I'm really wanting to work with people on. So home hardening emphasis. If you want to do thinning of your woods, or clean up the understory, DNR is your agency. They have their own cost share program, which I'll talk about. They're the best fit for that type of work. But if you want to do things in that 30, 0 to 5, 0 to 30, you want to make some home improvements like replacing the vent screens, or maybe replacing your gutters, installing hardscaping around your home, those are the type of projects we're really looking to do. And then one thing I also wanted to mention about, it's not a grant. So every cost share project we do, there's going to be basically a binding agreement between you, the landowner, and KCD, the agency. And there's a bit of a bureaucratic process that we have to go through. Hopefully next year I'll be able to make some changes and make it a little bit smoother.
Not with King County, right?
Not with the county, which is why I'm saying I'm looking to change things. They're not static. But there is a bit of a bureaucratic process to go through for these plannings and getting it approved and actually signing the paper that says, we're going to give you X amount of money to basically do this work. And that planning approval process, the first step is the risk assessment from me. So filling out that request for technical assistance, have me come out and do a risk assessment of your property. The rest of the steps, you don't need to know, because you got to do the first one first. That said, I have a guide that walks through the entire process, the limitations for cost share. If you want to take and know more before getting the requesting the risk assessment, just like shoot me an email and I can send you the PDF guide that kind of walks through the entire process. But for tonight, just request a risk assessment. All right, now I want to talk about 3 particular flavors of cost share projects. Mostly what I've been sort of talking about is the individual property. So you, a landowner, want to do something on your property. Do the risk assessment, we plan that project together, we help cost share on it. Second flavor is a community mitigation project. So if you are one of those organized communities and you're talking with your neighbors and you're like, yeah, we don't want to just work around our homes, or we maybe have this access road that we feel like we could improve, get some of the vegetation cleared back so it's easier for fire trucks to get in and out. We all want to get new address signs so they're very clear and it'll be easy for fire trucks to find us. Stuff like that. I'll go into some examples and I'll highlight a project that I'm working on now that sort of fits this community mitigation project. And then the last flavor of project is FireWise Community Support Project. So this is really designed for those communities who are enrolled in the FireWise program. And basically, if you're an organized FireWise community, to stay in good standing for that program, you have to commit to doing things. You have to document yeah, we held an education event. Yeah, we did a day of everyone going around and cleaning up debris around our homes. The FireWise Community Support cost share is intended to be very customizable. You're an organized community, you want to do something, but maybe we need to reach a bunch of people, but we don't know how to reach everyone in our neighborhood. We can work with communities to basically figure out, well, what's an activity that will support you, and we can help cover the cost of whatever that activity is. And I'll give an example here shortly. So examples, individual property project, that photo on the left, same property I had a photo of before, installing hardscaping. Another thing we did on that property, all those arborvitae, those were super highly flammable vegetation. They were within 30 feet of the home. The landowner really didn't want those there. Neither did I in terms of wildfire risk. We helped pay for a removal of those. So this is the community mitigation project I'm working on now. It's out in a community near Redmond, and they actually have properties within their community that are technically owned by their community association. So it's sort of like everyone owns it together and their community association is responsible for managing it. And it's about 3 acres and it's sort of forest vegetation. You can kind of see in that photo on the left. A lot of it goes very close to, this is approximately 30 homes that are very closely spaced to one another. And so our project is working in that HOA owned parcel to basically eliminate some of the woody vegetation, prune up trees, get rid of some of the dead small diameter trees that are in that area, just to reduce the chance that if a fire was to start at a home, it wouldn't travel into the woods. If a fire was to move from the woods towards the homes, we'd kind of have this fire break that would be less volatile. So that's an example of a community project. And then a community support project, example that I did earlier this year, FireWise community around Shadow Lake in the Maple Valley area. They were organizing a chipper day, and they were like, hey, we need to get as many people to sort of participate in our chipper day. We're going to send a chipper around. We want people to bring out their woody debris around their homes. And they put together a postcard that they wanted to send to basically every address within the boundaries of their FireWise community. So we helped pay for the cost of printing those and the postage to send them out. And that's an example of one of those community support projects. It's not on the ground work, but it's helping a community of residents who are organized and trying to do on the ground work. And like I said, it's very customizable. Yes?
Do you do cost share with the chipper type program? That's pretty.
I hear some snickers. That's interesting.
That's pretty. Yeah, that would definitely be. I know it interests a lot of people here, but
yeah,
I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm not a. Yes, we would, but I'm not. The way I've typically seen chipper days run, I'm not a huge proponent of them, or I find it hard to support them, and mostly go back to sort of the purpose of my program and the purpose of cost share. It's to reduce the chance of a home or residential structures being destroyed. And most chipper days I've seen, where they're pulling the woody vegetation from, you know, if it's like, oh, we're doing a chipper day, bring out your brush, they're taking it from like well beyond 30 feet. People aren't pulling anything from the area around their homes. And so, you know, I'm like, I get that it can be an organizing thing, but usually I encourage people like, oh, the DNR has a micro grant program, or there's these other grant programs that could help fund your chipper day, and we'll do other stuff with you. But that said, I think, yeah, depending on how it's organized, what the focus of the chipper day is, we would cost share on that as a community project. I just tend to be a little bit more of a stickler about where are you pulling the brush from?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Good question though. Any other questions about cost share projects before I move on to talking about DNR, Washington DNR and their services? Okay.
Actually,
Yeah.
what would you like to see happen as far as with where you want the dollars to go? Like what do you think is an effective strategy for if a community has gone through the assessment where 10 homes are having a conversation? Like what would you like? What's your preference there?
Oh man. What would be great, this hasn't happened yet, but I'm holding out hope that if I had a community and like multiple residents, if I could get people to sort of like collectively like, we all want to do home hardening, then be like, great, let me, and I'll even, in most cases, the way that we do these cost share is like, I leave it to the landowners, like you gotta go find the contractor to do this work. For community mitigation projects, when it starts getting a little more complex, talking multiple properties, maybe a little bit bigger budget, if I deem it like a good call, like I'll step in, we'll actually do it as a public works project, so it'll be like, all right, I'm gonna have an agreement with all these landowners, you're gonna give me permission to sort of manage this project, and then I'll actually organize it, hire the contractor, the district will hire the contractor itself. What I'd love to see communities do more often is sort of like collectively be like, yeah, our 10 homes, we all wanna replace the screens that are 1/4 inch with 1/8 inch screens on all of our events. Go hire a contractor that will do it on all of our homes. We want to do the 5 foot or maybe 2 foot hardscaping around the immediate area. Like we'll all go in together, hire the same contractor. To me, like that would be amazing. It's hard though, because everyone has personal preferences, and it's that's why we kind of have the individual property model ready and available. The other thing though that I really think is important is sort of the evacuation piece. And I've been in multiple communities before where the evacuation routes, it's like your standard public road or whatever, everyone can get to it, but I see things that aren't great, like you got overhead power lines and the vegetation's growing into it, and thinking about emergency situations, if there is a fire, if there is east wind events, like those aren't great. Evacuation routes could be in better condition. We could eliminate some of the vegetation that's there, really make it safe and like prepared for everyone in the neighborhood needs to leave. So those are the other things I've often tried to encourage communities that I'm working with of like, let's try to do something with your evacuation routes. Let's, rather than just letting the utility company do their bare minimum pruning back vegetation, like, no, let's like really take care of it and be prepared. Good question, yeah. Any other questions about, okay, I'm gonna walk across the room real quick because there's a handout I wanna mention. What I got up here now is a screenshot of DNR's Service Forestry Program's webpage. Former KCD employee, Matt Axe, I know some of you in the room probably know him because he was in my position before he left for DNR. He's the DNR district manager for like this area that covers Vashon. And DNR's got their own cost share program now. It just came over to the west side. They've been doing it a ton on the east side of the state. And like I was saying earlier, if you're interested in doing sort of I want to do stuff in my woods, I'm concerned about the health of my forest, I think there's too many trees per acre, their cost share program is great. They have foresters on staff, and basically if you contacted Matt and, I'd say go to the website, read a bit about the program, but if you contact Matt and you're like, hey, I heard about this cost share program, I'm interested in having a visit from a forester because I think I want to do some thinning or slash removal or whatever it is, invasive species control, then their forester will come out, walk around the property like I would for my risk assessment. They give you a report and say, yeah, you got these issues, and then they would tell you, yeah, we could cost share on it. You wanted to thin this, they'll put together a plan for you. Basically works the same way as my cost share program. They'll cost share a certain percentage to do the work. And I only printed out a couple copies, but if you contact Matt, he'll probably send this to you in digital form, but the just like plain paper that's over there, it's basically the first page is sort of just a basic fact sheet about their cost share program, and then the other sections after that is like an actual application. So like you could even take this and like start filling it out if you really felt like you wanted to apply to their program. But they're great too, and we try to work together. So like oftentimes when I go out to properties, I'm doing my risk assessment. If I see something in your woods, I'll be like, you know what? We could do home hardening with my program. And I'm going to put you in touch with DNR because I think they can help you with your forested areas. Question?
Forest steward program is sort of like you're trying to manage your forest like a field. You're trying to generate revenue and all that kind of stuff. This sounds like it might be a lot lower key if you just have a random, forest on Vashon.
Yeah.
But you're not trying to make money. This is still applicable?
Oh yeah, most definitely, yeah. Like their program and like our conservation district, like we also have a forest cost share program, but it's not as easy to access as DNR's, because for DNR, like literally all you need is a visit from their forester. We have a forest cost share program, but you gotta have a forest management plan for your property before you can apply to it. It's a good program, but it's more steps to go through, so unless you're really committed to having a management plan for your property, DNR is your best option. Question?
What are the kinds of things that you see when you do a risk assessment out in someone's forest that you say, ooh, that doesn't look good?
Yeah, a lot of times it is like too dense, like too many trees per acre, really dense growth. Trees are basically hindering one another because there's just too many of them. And it's a result of, like, in most cases, it was previously industrial timberland. At some point in the past, it became a residential property, but previously it was just probably clear cut. And tons of trees grew up, and no one managed it after that. So that's definitely something I see. Invasive species too, like, that is not good for forest health. Like, that is competing with all your trees, it's competing with your native vegetation. Sure, the blackberry looks nice, lush and green right now, but come September when we've had a drought, like that stuff dries out too, and it gets super dense. So if that's like along your road or like kind of getting close to the 30-foot area, yeah, those are health issues like I want to address. Yeah, good question. Yeah, in the back.
You can access this information by, on Matthew X, the email address there, or
yeah.
Just go to DNR or what?
Yeah, emailing Matt will be probably the fastest route. DNR's got a lot of information on their website. But if you search DNR, and this is Forest Resilience, that's the program, and that'll get you to this webpage. Otherwise, I'd say take one of these because this has all the pertinent information about it. I'll leave it here if you want it. Yeah. Matt wanted to come tonight, but he was unavailable. I think he's on call for wildfires. It's part of the perks of working for DNR. But any questions about DNR's program services that I can try my best to answer? Okay. Well then, just more generally, I guess, any questions, topics people want to revisit, or things we didn't cover? Yeah.
I don't know how well you set it up on Vashon yet, but if you had any kind of sort of scenarios that would keep you up at night, in terms of scenario, basically, general, I seem to recall that the last big fire started was to the south and west, I believe, and it kind of came up the island from that direction back in the 30s.
It took out like 20% of the island, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So if you've sort of thought about our scenarios in a more specific way, or if you want to jump into that pond or anything.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really. I try. For me, I try to stay focused on like the more positive things. The fact that, I mean, the fact that like, you know, we really do have like the power, like we really do have the ability to like reduce the risk. And thinking about the bigger picture sometimes, like that can feel a bit like overwhelming, like there's so many trees and there's so much forest vegetation, like we're never going to be able to survive. But the reality is like, no, like every bit we do around our own properties, thinking about this, talking about this, Vashon has such a great reputation for being, you know, community focused, very organized when it comes to these types of sort of, we support one another, we depend on one another. That is just incrementally, the more we can continue doing that, and like, I'm very encouraged because, I mean, I've been here for 8 years now, and like when I first came, I was like, no one was talking about wildfire on the west side. You know, we weren't doing anything at the district about that. DNR wasn't doing anything on the west side about that. And it's been such a sea change. You know, I see them talking about wildfire weather on the local news in Western Washington. Like, that's huge. And so it really does start with that awareness and what we can do as individuals on our property, what we can do collectively in our neighborhoods. You know, all that matters, and is going to incrementally reduce the risk, make us better prepared, reduce the chances that something really bad is going to happen. You know, and then the other part really is this: what's our ability to suppress? What's the resources available to respond when something does start? And so the fact that that levee's coming up, like that's critical. That's really important to sort of like, because there really is only so much we can do to prepare. Suppression is the other part that's like critical to like reducing the amount of damage that occurs. So that's the other half of the coin. We can do everything we can as individuals, and then we kind of got to leave it up to the professionals when something starts, and it's up to them to sort of like put it out. Yeah.
Speaking of professionals and resources, how much of a resource is the sound? And like in California, where I used to live also, super scoopers.
Yeah. If they had to bring in the air show, yeah, they got a ready supply of water for that. Is that what you're talking about? Like being able to like get water to, yeah. Yeah, I imagine they would. Yeah, they'd use the sound.
If it's black water.
Yeah, but you know, like at that point, once a fire starts, I mean, water helps. Once it reaches a certain size though, like you gotta, yeah, you gotta
run.
You gotta dig line, you gotta dozer line, you gotta find those barriers that you can hold to sort of prevent it from spreading, so.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking that, okay, we can just
yeah.
fold our arms and say, okay, we'll wait for the super scoopers.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
It's not a resource for us though. We're not gonna take the water out of the sound. We're not pumping. I've had residents ask me about that. We don't pump water out of the sound. We're taking off the hydrant system, or bringing our water tenders in to support the incident. But we won't use the water out of the sound.
And you won't even use local ponds or wells?
No, we don't draft.
That's what I'm
No, we'll do a tender shuttle. The larger tenders are 3,000 gallons. We have 3 of those on island. And we have one 1,500 gallon, but drafting out of, as John has mentioned, we won't draft out of a water source. We're going to go right to a hydrant.
And there's not
You've
much
got it right
here.
there, like say Fisher Pond, to.
We won't draft. We don't draft.
And damage the pond.
Are there not dory planes that will drop? I mean, I don't know if they use borate anymore, but big bombers that drop.
There's air resources available in the state that we can call and we can activate. It's going to take it's going to have to be a large incident for them to get up in the air, and it's going to be fairly well into the incident before they arrive. Yep.
Yeah, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I have a fairly substantial woods that I haven't done anything for 40 years. And the understory are blackberries, salmonberries, hazelnut, which are multi-trunked, holly, laurel, and dead alders that are still standing, some are down, and then a lot of down fir logs. For instance, if I wanted to clear and thin, are salmonberries highly flammable? Would that be something, or are they not? Can you name some of those things that might be more flammable than others, or?
Yeah, anything that's like waxy or has like oils in them. So salal can be, like if it's really hot and dry, that's a vegetation that can, yeah, burn pretty intensely. A lot of, like I was saying, like arborvitae, juniper, like that type of vegetation is like not great. I'm looking for those. The other thing I'll mention is when I do start getting out into like the 30 to 100 foot, that's sort of called the extended zone around homes. And oftentimes that is where I encounter like the more like, oh, it's a forest. The things that I encourage people to focus on is at that distance, you know, what we're trying to do is we don't want a surface fire to be able to climb into the canopy like near your home. And this is something you could apply property-wide too, really, is like, it's not so much that like, oh, I have, you know, maybe you have too many trees per acre and some are dead, not healthy, and so, yeah, those are more readily able to burn. But what we want to do is we want to try and get some separation between the lowest tree branches and your shrub layer. So if the shrub layer was to be burning, there's less of a chance that the surface fire could climb from those shrubs up into the tree canopy. Because once you have fire in the canopy of trees, way more dangerous, can spread really quickly, is going to be a greater threat to you, it's going to be a greater threat to any like wildfire sort of response resources that are on site. So that's often the practice I'm talking to people about, is like, hey, try to get 6 to 10 feet of separation between your lowest conifer, and especially conifer trees, your lowest conifer tree branches and that shrub layer. And then you can kind of pick your poison, like, do I want to cut down the shrubs or do I want to prune up the branches? Yeah, it's a good question though. Other, yeah?
What about, like you may have noticed, it's just as you remove vegetation, the soil dries out, and what about managing like moisture content, staying green through the dry months versus fire management? What's the thought there?
Yeah, it's a good question. And this is where if you read through like the FireWise recommendations, once you start getting to the 30 to 100 foot, I depart from their recommendations, specifically around spacing between tree canopies. And for the particular reason that you mentioned is, FireWise, it was sort of developed as a nationwide program, and my best guess is they were really kind of looking at like, sort of like Colorado, like intercontinental sort of conifer forest when they put together their recommendations. Because to me, I want to have evergreen canopy cover because that shade is going to keep it more moist, it's going to help with storm water, it's going to keep it shadier and cool in the understory. And that's better for sort of reducing the chance, slowing any kind of fire in the understory. So for me, like it's all about, you know, maintaining tree canopy cover, but modifying that vegetation so you do get that separation. If you have highly volatile vegetation, maybe eliminating that. But it's a balance, and that's partly why I, you know, like for our cost share and stuff, it's like, you get a risk assessment first, because every property is different. We want to make sure we're kind of meeting that balance of like, not degrading the environment, but also reducing your risk in a meaningful way. So, it's tough. It's a balance. Other questions? Yes, you in the back.
Well, you're talking about that space, and I know you can't give exact figures, but could you give an idea of how much space? Say if we wanted to go in and just trim the tops of the understory, not really take it out or anything, but just, you know, tone it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, well, you want to have between 6 and 10 feet of like open space between your tree, lowest tree branches and your vegetation. You know, if you can take your vegetation down to maybe like 3 or 2 feet, that'd probably be good if you're looking to just manage the understory. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, just an idea of how much is good. I mean, some of them are already that, and, you know, we could just look at them and see, but, yeah, how much space would be desirable if you could have your growth?
Yeah. Yeah, good question, yeah.
In a wildland fire, when do you leave your home? Because you can put spot fires out that start to come.
As soon as they tell you to. That would be my message. As a former wildland firefighter, if some official tells you to leave, like, please leave. Because, sure, like, you may be able to do some work in helping suppress whatever's going on in your property. You are measurably increasing the risk to the resources that are responding. Like, if we're, you know, those were always the scariest fires I was ever on, was when we were actually in the wildland urban interface, and thankfully there wasn't very many fires that I was on and I was in that situation. But like, traffic is like, that's terrible. You know, like if you stay behind and you're leaving late and the fire trucks are trying to get in to do their job and they gotta stop or they gotta slow down because there's traffic on the road, people didn't evacuate when they were told to, you're just like kind of hurting those like first responders from like being able to do their job, and you're probably causing like more destruction. So that'd be my message, is like, if some kind of official has told you to leave, like, you should really leave. Yeah. Yeah.
If we have to leave, where do we go? Because we can't go against vote, right? Just everyone will be trying to get here to deal with fire, so where do we go?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Because you can look at your neighborhood, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, and so this is part of like when I do my community risk assessments, that's one of the things that I think about and I'm looking at is like evacuation routes to get out, but also potential areas nearby that could function as like a safety zone. So some of those things would be like big open fields, like a soccer field, or, you know, like oftentimes school grounds, like they have big areas, but that's where I would usually defer to local, you know, sort of fire departments or King County Emergency Management. That's sort of their realm of evacuation, and what's that look like? Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna identify areas in the event of an incident. If it's an isolated incident, we're gonna be able to move you somewhere on island that's safe. If it's a larger scale incident, then we're gonna have the Emergency Operations Center open, and we're gonna be working on a plan to evacuate people off island. So we've had these conversations, Vashon Be Prepared, Vashon Fire, King County Emergency Management continues to have these conversations. So it depends on the scale of the incident, and we will let you know exactly where to go, where the shelter is, where the safe place is.
I mean, I figure you're not gonna be able to get off island.
Well, if you got a boat.
Right, if you have a boat.
Not with your vehicle, maybe not with your vehicle.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, life safety is the most important. If we can put, you know, several thousand people on ferries, then we'll start moving people as quickly as we can off with, you know, individually.
Otherwise, would you head to a field? You know what I mean?
Well, if there's an isolated incident in your area, we're gonna designate a spot for you to go. And, you know, it's gonna be, we're gonna even take it to the next level to try to find the transportation to get you there. If you have your car, you can go there. We'll go to the school, or we're gonna come to, you know, this location. We're gonna designate a spot that's safe. Hopefully we have shelter, we have some food, for a longer, you know, an extended period of time. Until we
heading out with a horse trailer or two.
What's that?
I have horses, so I'd have two horse trailers, and horses in them.
Yeah.
Question in the back?
What's the largest wildfire we've had on Ashland, say the past 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I'm not the best historian because I've only been here 10 months. Ben's been with the agency 15 years.
There was that
and
fire up in the
grew up and lives on it.
I'd have to look it up, sir. I apologize. I don't know that answer.
There was one in
Tahlequah about 15 years ago,
Yeah.
just to the west of the ferry dock, and they had to bring over the Tacoma firefighters as well to help. That was in the forest for many, many days.
Yeah, we have, you know, the folks have been on with the agency longer than I have discussed the south end being, you know, one of our more critical risks. We've talked with, I've had meetings with Tacoma Fire. We work with their boats pretty regularly. South King has a boat. We do not have a boat that can suppress fire from the water. We have a small rescue boat, but we would be relying on our neighboring partners that we work with and have conversations with to bring that resource over. So I don't know the answer to the size of the last one, but everyone always refers to, as the gentleman said, Tahlequah and the south end of Maury. It's dry. You can see it. We've seen it recently from the water. You can see where it's dying.
It's where the poison oak is.
Sorry, you had your hand up.
Microclimates too.
So my question is, I can do all this work on my property, and I'm next to an absentee landowner who I haven't seen in 25 years, and you can't walk through the woods. The fuel is so deep you can't walk through it. You have to kind of crawl and climb.
Yeah. How far away is that from your
Less
home?
than 100.
Yeah, yeah. That's good that it's not
Yeah.
within 30 feet. But yeah,
Well,
I mean,
it's not 30,
that is the challenge of like,
Yeah.
you know.
And that's all over the island. You
Yeah.
see, right up into town, you'll see just patches, small patches
Yeah.
of really high fuel.
Yeah.
No one's ever been through
Right,
there.
yeah, and we're not, there's other areas of the country, like you go down to California, even in eastern Washington now, some communities are like, it's no longer the carrot of, hey, we'll cost share with you to do this, we'll offer you this free risk assessment. It's, you're getting fined because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. Like, we're not there yet, I don't know if we'll ever get there on the west side, but like that, a lot of communities are turning into that of like, well, you know, people aren't voluntarily doing it, and we're seeing that it's such a high risk, there's such, you know, potential for loss that it makes sense to, this is no longer a voluntary action, you have to do these things.
Yeah.
That's not our reality. It does kind of come down to sort of like the relationship building with your neighbors, social pressure of getting people to kind of do the right thing, care about it, invest the time and money, but it's an uphill battle, you know, it's just our popular mindset for Western Washington. I mean, there's so many people I encounter and meet who are like,
Not a problem.
it's not a problem, it'll never happen, and I'm like, maybe it won't to you in your lifetime, but like the potential's always there. Yeah.
I just got to follow up on that. So in his scenario, could the cost sharing, is it flexible enough to do mitigation and or risk reduction measures, you know, right up to that property line, even if it's further than the area that you've identified?
Yeah, I'll do that sometimes if like, it depends on what we identify during a risk assessment. And a lot of times I do go beyond like the 30 foot if it's like a driveway. I'm like, yeah, we wanna make the conditions better for your like escape route off your property. And if there is some like really hazardous high risk thing in a certain direction from your home,
south.
Yeah, then
east.
We'll always look at like what's the high risk things that are there and how can we mitigate it.
And it's not just wildfire. If that residence were to burn, you know,
I could study that.
Very quickly, you know, extend into their property.
Yeah, oftentimes, especially when homes are closer to one another, like that community project I showed earlier, I've done multiple risk assessments with individuals, and like my report talks about here's the things you can do in your 5 foot area, and then we get to the intermediate, and I'm like, you have to talk to your neighbor, because the highest risk thing in your intermediate area is like your neighbor's home burning, because there's nothing you can do. If your neighbor's home that's 10 feet away becomes engulfed in flames, like your house is going to catch on fire, like unless it gets put out like immediately, because it's the largest fuel source that we have on the land is our homes, really. I saw a couple other, yes, ma'am.
Well, we're bounded on one side by water district land. So, and it's forested for the most part, and I don't know what they do to take care of fuel, removing unnecessary fuel.
Yeah.
And how would I find that out? I mean,
yeah.
do you guys, we're down at Ellisport at the King County Water District pump station's right across from us.
Yeah, finding someone within the organization to talk to. And I always encourage people, like your neighbors and stuff, you've got that neighbor, like, I'm not regulatory, non-enforcement, like, you know, I'm just there to offer help. They can say, no thanks, but like, feel free, like, give them my information, take an extra flyer and give it to them, like, you know, we're all about just trying to help people do the right things. So, yeah,
Just
Ben?
real quick, let me just say
yeah.
I work for Water District 19, so like, I can tell you that we haven't done anything, but I don't see that as a mark against us because it's a very fresh conversation. But yeah, I'll bring it to the,
No, I wasn't-
bring it
I
to
was-
the group.
Yeah, when Maura, I was just thinking, oh, well, let me think, what is around my house? What is?
Well, that was my follow-up question too, because I had a question, because King County has a bunch of land in the land trust.
Yep.
And you wouldn't be, so I would assume, would you work with them or DNR, or do they have their own in-house kind of?
Well, we've done work with like the land trusts. They've taken advantage of, we've worked with them on doing a forest health like cost share project. But again, that usually doesn't fit within my program just because again, like their land generally isn't in close proximity to residential properties or homes. The county, no, we don't work on public land generally. We always try to collaborate and sort of coordinate with like county, other public agencies, but in most cases, if it's public land, our whole mission of our district is to support private landowners because, you know, the county's not gonna come out and help you manage your forest, so like, that's what we're here for, is to support the private landowner and what they're doing. Or in some cases, you know, we've done work with water districts too, rare,
And it's
but,
watershed, so
yeah,
it's wet,
yeah.
but still.
Ben?
Hey, I'd just like to take the opportunity, I promised Mike we'd get him out of here right about now.
Oh, very.
And these are all amazing questions, I hate to even bring it up at this point, but he has that information there. I think if you have further questions, I'd like to maybe take this opportunity to let him sneak out of here, because he's got a place I promised he could get to. And we can kind of send those forward, or you can send them on to us, we'll make sure to get the answers.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Super
Yeah,
helpful.
thank you so much.